Now, Syria says it's not going to the long-awaited peace summit to hand over power or form a transitional government. The statement from the country's information minister has sparked fears the planned Geneva conference will be called off. Well, we now have an exclusive opportunity to discuss this vital issue directly with an advisor to President Assad, Dr. Bouthania Shaaban. She joins us now live for more from Damascus. Thank you so much for joining us to discuss this, Dr. Shaaban. So as we know, so many efforts to hold a Syrian peace conference have failed so far. How different can we expect things to be this time around? I mean, will the Syrian government attend the Geneva Peace Conference?
I'm not sure that I'm hearing you well, but I suppose you're asking me about the government position towards Geneva too. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm wondering about the participation of the Syrian government, as we heard earlier, that it might not go to Geneva this time around. So what will be happening? How do you expect things to be different this time? And what needs to happen in order for the government to attend this peace effort?
Well, the Syrian government has announced many times that it is ready to attend Geneva without preconditions. The problem is with the others who speak many different languages at different places and who keep putting conditions. We just learned that the Russians and the Americans have agreed that Geneva too should be convened without any preconditions from any side. So that's fine with us.
But what about the opposition now in Syria? I mean, who are you ready to sit down to talk with? Is there any party? I know that the opposition is becoming radicalized, but, could you name perhaps one group that you're ready to negotiate with at this point?
Well, there are many groups of opposition. The problem is that in some countries calling armed groups as oppositions or armed mercenaries or Al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra as oppositions. I think what we need to do is to have the people who represent political oppositions and who care about Syria and about the interests of Syria and the Syrian people. If you heard Saud al-Faisal yesterday, the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, you would immediately realize that the coalition that Saud al-Faisal represents is made by parties who have nothing to do with the Syrian people. The question we would like to ask is, who do these people represent on the ground? We would like to know. Do they represent Jabhat al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda, or who do they represent? They are not made in Syria. They do not represent the Syrian people.
At this point, the UN Arab League envoy, Ladar Brahimi, is meeting the delegates from Russia and the U.S. and other permanent UN members. But, at this gathering, we don't have any representatives from the Syrian government or the opposition present. So how can we expect any progress there then?
Well, the Syrian government is supposed to attend the Geneva too, not today. Now they are meeting in order to put the invitation letter, the date, etc. We don't have to attend today. But the Syrian government will be attending Geneva too without any preconditions. And I think the progress should be made by the Syrian people. The problem we are having now is that other parties like Saudi Arabia and the U.S. assume themselves to be representing the Syrian people. And so they take the liberty to speak in the name of the Syrian people. I think they should honor their words that the Syrian people are the ones who should decide their future and who should dialogue in Geneva too, and who should reach a decision about the future of their country and about what their country would look like in the future.
Well, Dr. Shaaban just said that Syrian government will attend the Geneva Peace Conference. However, we are hearing that the leading Western-backed opposition group has refused to attend peace talks in Geneva unless President Assad steps down. So what's your take on this situation?
These are not opposition groups. These are the groups that are made by Saud al-Faisal, by Turkey, by other parties in the world. Could they tell us who these people represent on the ground? Like the coalition, who do they represent? We want to know. Many groups on the ground have refused the coalition. Many nationalist opposition have refused the coalition. So could they tell us who do these people represent? And as for asking President Assad to step down, I think I would call on Secretary Kerry to speak the same language everywhere and not to change his narrative according to the capital in which he speaks. He speaks one thing in Cairo, something different in Saudi Arabia, something different in Poland, something different with Lavrov. I think the simplest thing is that a Secretary of the United States should honor his words and speak the same language everywhere and make the same stand so that people would understand what is the stand of the United States. They should respect the intelligence of people.
Well, you know, there's also another player in all of this, and it's Iran. Russia insists that Iran must be invited to the peace conference, the peace summit, but the opposition is saying that if Iran's in, they are out. So will the diplomats somehow manage to meet each other halfway on this one? Or come to an agreement for that matter?
I think you have to differentiate. I think you have to differentiate between constructive parties who want a solution to the crisis and between other parties who had been for 2 years putting obstacles on the way of solving the Syrian crisis. Russia, China, Iran are parties who are constructive, who want to solve the crisis in Syria. Other parties who say we will not attend unless something is done, we will not attend if Iran comes, we will not do this. Those are the people who have been putting obstacles because they have fighters on the ground who are killing the Syrian people, who are destroying Syrian cities, who have created this problem for Syria. So we have to differentiate between the two sides and know who does everybody represent.
Well, as we know, the first Geneva conference has yielded a roadmap on how to go about solving some of the problems and how to solve the conflict in general. But so far, things haven't gone exactly to plan. How do you expect Geneva 2 to be different and to be more effective in that sense?
If I may speak in the name of Syrian people who live in Syria, who have been suffering in Syria, I would like to say that the first thing that the Syrian people want is for violence to stop, which is, by the way, the first item in Geneva 1 that was written on the 30th of June 2012, to stop violence by all parties, to stop armed groups, to restore peace and safety to the country, and then it is up to the Syrian people meeting around the table to put the mechanism for a political process for Syria. It's not up to these people who say, who invent stories every day in order to obstruct a solution. What we want is to restore peace and security and then start a political process, but speaking one language with one objective, which is to solve the crisis in Syria and to take care of the Syrian people, not to create a crisis at their expense and to create havoc for them.
Well, at the moment, Syria is in the process of destroying its chemical stockpiles. In your opinion, but very briefly, if you could, how realistic is the deadline by the middle of next year for Syria to completely get rid of its chemical stockpiles? Very briefly, if you could, please.
You know what? If there is a political will to end this crisis, everything becomes realistic. The issue is not the time, the issue is not the dates and weeks, the issue is the political will. If these parties have political will to put an end to the Syrian suffering, to the Syrian crisis, they can do it within a week because they can only stop the financing, the arming, the smuggling of terrorists across the borders from Turkey, and 50% of the Syrian crisis would be solved in 2 weeks' time, But all depends on the political will. It is not, the issue is neither the time nor the ability of these parties to put an end to the suffering of the Syrian people.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bouthania Shaaban, the political and media advisor to Syria's President Bashar al-Assad.